5 of the best doctors in America stood around a conference table. A 300-page file spread before them, and not one of them said anything worth a damn. Eleanor Hartwell, the woman who had built an $8 billion pharmaceutical empire from nothing, was lying in a hospital bed on the 9th floor, her lips faintly blue, her numbers slipping by the hour. The doctors called it a case beyond the reach of current medical knowledge. But Sebastian Cole, the man in the maintenance uniform standing out in the hallway, holding the hand of his 6-year-old daughter, he saw something different. Something small, something the 5 of them had walked right past. Find out what he saw and why it changed everything. The Monday morning meeting on the 32nd floor of the Hartwell Biogroup Tower had started at 9 o'clock sharp. Eleanor Hartwell stood at the head of the room in a navy blazer, her voice steady and precise, walking 20 senior directors through a third-quarter analysis that she had largely written from memory. The numbers on the projection screen confirmed what everyone in the room already knew: she was the sharpest mind in that building, possibly in that industry. She did not need slides. She never had. Vincent Caldwell sat at the far end of the table. He was 48 years old, with silver temples and a tailored suit that always looked a half size too small across the shoulders. His fingers rested on the tabletop, tapping once, slowly, then going still. Diana Marsh stood near the door with a leather portfolio tucked under her arm. She had been Eleanor's assistant for 6 years, and she had learned to read the room the way a sailor reads the sky, early, quietly, and never out loud. Eleanor paused mid-sentence. It was brief. A half-second interruption that no one in the room registered as unusual. She placed her left hand flat on the table. Her fingers were steady, but Diana saw the motion. Diana always saw the motion. Eleanor continued. Her voice found its rhythm again. But something had shifted a fraction of a degree, invisible to everyone but the woman standing near the door. 30 seconds later, Eleanor's voice lost its footing again. Her lips had gone pale. The color had drained from the edges of her mouth so gradually that it looked like a trick of the overhead lighting. Then she went down. Not a slow fall. Not a graceful collapse. Eleanor Hartwell's left hand swept the glass of water and half the presentation folder off the table as she went forward, and she hit the floor before anyone had time to stand. Diana moved first. Then came the voices, the chairs scraping back, the room flooding with sound. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone else was already on the phone. Vincent Caldwell rose from his chair. He was the last person in the room to stand 1 second behind everyone else. It was such a small thing, a single second, but Diana noticed it. She filed it away somewhere behind her sternum, in the place where she kept things she did not yet have words for. By 11:30 that morning, Eleanor Hartwell was in Mercy General, unconscious, with an IV in her arm, and 5 of the country's most respected specialists being summoned from across the city. 3 floors below the 9th floor ICU, a man named Sebastian Cole was replacing a fluorescent bulb in the hallway of the 7th floor. His maintenance cart sat against the wall. His toolbox was open at his feet. He worked without hurry, without conversation, the way a man works when the job is familiar and the mind is elsewhere. Beside him, on a plastic chair pushed against the baseboard, sat a 6-year-old girl named Grace. She had brown hair pulled into 2 uneven ponytails, and she was holding a stuffed bear named Pepper tightly under one arm, while she turned the pages of a picture book with the other hand. Grace was there because the regular babysitter had canceled that morning with 40 minutes' notice. And Sebastian Cole did not have a backup plan. A nurse walked past, glanced at Grace, and slowed. She looked at Sebastian with the particular expression of someone about to deliver an inconvenient policy. Sebastian met her eyes before she could speak. He said, quietly, that he would have the section finished within the hour, and that his daughter would not touch anything. The nurse looked at Grace one more time. Grace, who was entirely absorbed in a page featuring a very large orange cat, and walked on without a word. Grace looked up from her book. They don't really want us here, do they? Dad? Sebastian stepped down from the small step stool he was standing on and crouched to her level. He retied the lace of her left sneaker, which had come loose. We'll finish up and head home, he said. Grace considered this. Okay, she said. Then she turned another page. Sebastian loaded the old bulb into the cart and moved down the hallway. As he passed the entrance to the 7th floor ICU, he caught 2 words from a conversation between nurses at the station 9th floor and 5 specialists. He slowed his cart for a moment. Then he kept walking. 3 years earlier, Sebastian Cole had been a physician, not a general practitioner, not a hospitalist. He had been in emergency medicine attending at Northwestern Memorial, 11 years in, with a reputation for diagnosing the cases that other doctors sent home with instructions they later regretted. He had seen things in emergency rooms that most physicians only read about in journals. He had a particular kind of seeing, the kind that collected small details the way a drain collects rainwater, quietly and without announcement, until there was enough to know something. His wife, Margaret, had been 32 years old when she went into labor 6 weeks early. It was a Saturday night. The hospital was understaffed. Sebastian had come off an 18-hour shift, 2 hours before her contractions started. He had been in the room with her. He had seen something in the monitors, a pattern he recognized, a signal he knew how to read. But he was exhausted. He told himself his colleague was competent. He did not push. He did not insist. Margaret and the baby did not survive the night. Sebastian turned in his medical license 8 months later, on a Tuesday morning, without ceremony. He did not fight the decision. He did not seek therapy or peer support or any of the things people told him he should seek. He took the maintenance certification course that autumn, found a position at Mercy General, the same building, different floors, different uniform, and raised Grace alone. He read no medical journals. He attended no conferences. He told himself the knowledge was still there, and that was precisely why it could not be trusted. That evening, he sat in the parking structure with Grace asleep in the back seat, Pepper tucked under her chin. The lights of the hospital rose above him in the dark. He could see the 9th floor from where he sat. Some of the windows were still lit. He drove home. The second day began the way the first had ended, without answers. The 5 specialists gathered in the conference room adjacent to Eleanor's suite on the 9th floor at 8 in the morning. Dr. Hargrove, the cardiologist, had flown in from Boston. Dr. Lim, the neurologist, came from Johns Hopkins. Dr. Osei handled endocrinology, Dr. Wren ran hematology, and Dr. Yates had spent 30 years in autoimmune medicine at the Mayo Clinic. Between them, they had written more than 200 peer-reviewed papers. 3 had trained at Oxford. 1 had received a letter from the White House. The file on the table had grown overnight, 312 pages, including imaging from 4 separate labs, continuous ECG readouts, a full genomic panel, cerebrospinal fluid analysis, and a battery of inflammatory markers that had been processed on a rush basis. Dr. Hargrove opened the session. He noted the irregular cardiac rhythm, intermittent, inconsistent, not fitting the standard profiles for any recognized arrhythmia. Dr. Lim reviewed the neurological data and proposed autoimmune encephalitis, non-classical presentation. Dr. Osei worked through the metabolic panels and found nothing that supported that theory, but offered nothing to replace it. Dr. Wren and Dr. Yates disagreed on the next step, a second bone marrow biopsy or an expansion of the autoimmune panel, and the disagreement was professional, measured, and entirely unproductive. No one in the room had a diagnosis. In the corner of the whiteboard, a handwritten note from the night shift nurse read, "Patient has been taking imported herbal supplement, origin unverified. Components unknown." The note was on a small square of paper, pinned beneath a printout of the second ECG. No one had moved the printout. No one had read the note. Diana stood near the window during the entire session. She kept her hands folded in front of her. After the meeting ended, she remained in the room for a moment after the doctors filed out, and she looked at the whiteboard for a long time before she left. Vincent Caldwell appeared in the hallway as Diana stepped out. He asked about Eleanor's condition in the careful tone of a man performing concern. Diana told him there was no diagnosis yet. Vincent nodded with his brow slightly furrowed, a practiced expression, and said he was doing everything he could to hold things steady at the company. Diana thanked him. She watched him walk away. On the third day, Sebastian Cole was assigned to repair the air handling unit, servicing the 9th floor. He arrived at 7:15, let himself into the mechanical room adjacent to the ICU, and began the work. The job required him to pass through the hallway in front of the patient rooms multiple times across the course of the morning. Grace was not with him today. A neighbor was watching her. The first time he walked past room 917, he did not stop. He noticed the door was partly open, the room dim except for the soft blue glow of the monitoring equipment. He noticed the woman on the bed, slight against the pillows, one hand resting on her abdomen. He kept walking. The second time, he slowed. He did not know why exactly. Something about the color of the light on her left wrist. The skin at the edge of the compression cuff where it met her forearm there was a faint yellowish tinge along the border, the kind that had nothing to do with the overhead lighting. It was subtle. The kind of thing you would see and immediately explain away as nothing. Most people would have explained it away. Sebastian stood still in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then he walked on. In the mechanical room, he worked with one part of his mind and let the other part run. He had not thought in medical terms in 3 years. He had not allowed himself to. But the yellow margin on her wrist had unlocked something, a file he thought he had sealed. The pattern pushed through anyway. Irregular autonomic rhythm, asymmetric peripheral edema, nocturnal seizure activity. No identified infection source. The way the episodes came and went. The timing. He had seen one case like this in his 11 years. Once. A woman brought in from a wellness retreat in Nevada. Unconscious, deteriorating. She had been taking a botanical supplement marketed as a sleep aid. The compound was a galsemium alkaloid, a neurotoxin derived from a plant native to Southeast Asia, sometimes processed into capsule form and sold in premium packaging without accurate labeling. The alkaloid accumulated slowly. It mimicked half a dozen other conditions. It did not appear on standard toxicology panels. The seizures arrived late in the accumulation cycle, almost always between midnight and 4 in the morning, when the compound reached its peak concentration in the bloodstream. He sat in the cafeteria on the 2nd floor during his lunch break with his phone in front of him. He looked up the research paper. It was still there, published in 2019, Journal of Medical Toxicology, 18 pages. He read the abstract twice. Then he looked back toward the hallway that led to the elevator bank. He thought about the whiteboard in the conference room. He had walked past the open door of that room early in the morning. He had seen the handwritten note on the small square of paper pinned under the ECG printout. He had read it without meaning to. Imported herbal supplement. Origin unverified. Components unknown. He set his phone face down on the table. He looked out the cafeteria window at the city, in the gray midwinter light. He had been right before, and wrong when it mattered. He knew that. He lived in that knowledge every day, but he also knew what he had seen. He picked up his phone and went back upstairs. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Sebastian stopped at the 9th floor nursing station. The charge nurse, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, looked at him with the mild confusion of someone who expected a different person to be standing there. Sebastian introduced himself. He told her he had a concern about the patient in 917. He kept his language plain. He said he had observed something he wanted to share with the treating team. The nurse listened. She thanked him. Her voice was entirely polite and entirely closed. The words she used were the correct words for receiving information she had no intention of acting on. Sebastian nodded and turned toward the elevator. His phone buzzed. A text from his neighbor. Grace is running a little warm. Eating okay. Asking when you'll be home. He stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the hallway and read the message again. Then he looked back toward the end of the hall. Room 917. The monitor readings were visible through the glass panel beside the door, the irregular rhythm pulsing across the screen in its erratic, unfamiliar pattern. He called his neighbor back. He kept his voice level. He told her exactly what to do for a low-grade fever. How much to give, and when. He asked her to check on Grace every 30 minutes, and to call him if anything changed. His neighbor said she would. She said Grace had been asking for him. Sebastian ended the call. He stood another moment. Then he walked to the family waiting area at the end of the hall, sat down in one of the chairs beside the window, and waited. Diana Marsh came out of the consulting room at 5:20. She was walking with the focused, downward gaze of a person who was solving something in their head while their feet moved. Sebastian stood as she passed. "Miss Marsh," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. He was wearing a maintenance uniform. His toolbox was at his feet. He introduced himself by name and said he worked building services on the 9th floor. He told her he had something she needed to hear regarding Miss Hartwell. Diana looked at him for a long moment. There was something in the way he spoke, not nervous, not self-important. The tone was the tone of a person who understood the weight of what they were carrying and was not enjoying it. "Walk with me," she said. They stood near the window at the end of the hall. Sebastian spoke for less than 3 minutes. He described what he had seen on Eleanor's wrist. He described the pattern, the timing of the seizures, the autonomic irregularity, the edema distribution. He mentioned the research on galsemium alkaloid toxicity, and then he asked one question: had anyone tested the supplement? Diana went very still. She remembered the supplement. It had arrived 4 weeks ago in a matte black box with gold lettering, a premium botanical blend, marketed for executive stress management. Sent by a private wellness company Eleanor had been referred to through a contact in her network. Diana had ordered it. She had placed it on Eleanor's desk with the rest of the week's correspondence. No one had asked her about it. Not once. "Come with me," she said. The conference room held all 5 specialists. Sebastian walked in behind Diana. The room went quiet in the particular way. Rooms go quiet when someone enters who does not belong there. "Doctor," Hargrove asked, with professional restraint, who Sebastian was and what he was doing in a physician consultation. Sebastian set his phone on the table. The screen showed the 2019 toxicology paper, abstract visible, author affiliations listed. He told them, briefly and without embellishment, what he had observed. He told them about the galsemium alkaloid hypothesis. He told them about the note on the whiteboard. Lim smiled, the kind of smile that substitutes for a more direct response. Dr. Wren looked at the phone screen, and then at Sebastian, and then at the phone screen again. "You read one article online, Doctor," Wren said, "and you believe you've identified what 5 specialists have not." Sebastian did not raise his voice. He did not move to defend himself. He said, simply, "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to test the supplement." The room was quiet for 2 seconds. Diana was already at the door. She made 3 calls in the hallway outside. First to the wellness company, requesting immediate disclosure of all product components. Second, to Eleanor's home, to locate the supplement packaging. Third, to the hospital's toxicology lab, flagging an urgent intake request. Sebastian waited in the hall. No one asked him to sit down. No one offered him anything. Through the glass of the conference room, he could see the 5 physicians talking. He could not hear the words, but he watched Dr. Osei lean toward Dr. Hargrove and say something, and Dr. Hargrove go still. He stayed. Diana came back at 9:30 that night with 2 cups of coffee from the machine at the end of the hall. Sebastian had not left. She sat down beside him. "You're not a maintenance worker," she said. It was not a question, he told her. He kept it short. 11 years in emergency medicine, Northwestern Memorial, a reputation for catching what others missed. A wife named Margaret, who had gone into labor 6 weeks early on a Saturday night when the hospital was understaffed and Sebastian had been on his feet for 18 hours. A pattern he saw and did not act on with enough force. A loss he could not take back. He had surrendered his license voluntarily 8 months after that night. Not because anyone had asked him to, because he no longer trusted the instrument, and the instrument was himself. Diana held her coffee cup with both hands and did not speak for a while. Then Sebastian took out his phone and showed her a photo. Grace, asleep in the back seat of the car, Pepper tucked under her chin. "She gets sick easily," he said. "Every time she has a fever, I don't sleep. Not because I'm afraid. Because I know I can see exactly what's happening. And I've spent 3 years telling myself that seeing isn't enough." He put the phone back in his pocket. "I hate that I know that about myself." Diana looked at the photo for a moment after the screen went dark. Then she set her phone on the seat between them. On the screen was a preliminary result from the supplement company's own quality disclosure. Undisclosed botanical extract. Origin unverified. Composition pending independent analysis. The lab had accepted the sample on an emergency basis. Results expected by 2 in the morning. "If you're right," Diana said, "you just saved her life." Sebastian looked down the hall toward room 917. "Let's wait and see," he said. The call came at 11 minutes past 2 in the morning. Diana answered on the first ring. Sebastian was awake across from her, sitting with his back straight, not quite watching the clock on the wall, but aware of it. The sample contained a measurable concentration of a gelsemium derivative alkaloid consistent with the 2019 study. The level was elevated significantly above what would be produced by incidental contamination. This was not a mislabeled trace ingredient. The compound had been present in sufficient quantity to produce precisely the symptom profile Eleanor had been displaying for 4 days. The 5 physicians were called back in before 3 in the morning. Nobody called it a meeting. They moved with the efficient urgency of people who had stopped arguing about who was right and started focusing on what came next. Dr. Osei spoke first, outlining a treatment protocol: atropine to stabilize the autonomic system, continuous renal replacement to accelerate elimination, respiratory support on standby. Sebastian stood in the hallway outside the conference room. Diana had been allowed back in. He had not. Through the glass, he watched the doctors move with purpose, the same 5 people who, 24 hours earlier, had been circling the same inconclusive data. The file had not changed. The tests had not changed. Only one thing had been added. One detail, one note on a whiteboard. One man in a maintenance uniform who had stood in a hallway long enough to see what the light was doing to the skin on a woman's wrist. Grace called at 5 in the morning. Her voice was quiet, a little husky from sleep. She asked if he was still at work. He said yes. She asked if the machine was fixed. He told her almost. There was a pause. "Is the sick person going to be okay?" she asked. Sebastian looked at the door to room 917. The monitor through the glass was still irregular, but the readings had moved just slightly back from the edge. The 5th hour of the protocol. Dr. Osei had said the turn usually came in the 5th or 6th hour, if it came. "I think so," he said. "Good," Grace said. "Pepper says hi." Sebastian pressed the phone briefly against his forehead before answering. "Tell Pepper hi back." By 7 in the morning, Eleanor Hartwell's cardiac rhythm had returned to sinus. Her blood pressure held through 2 consecutive checks. The overnight resident made a note in the chart. Dr. Hargrove came out of the room and stood in the hallway, and he looked at Sebastian Cole for a long time. There was no apology in the look. There was no warmth, but there was something an acknowledgement passed between two men who both understood what had happened in that building across the night. "The protocol is working," Dr. Hargrove said. He walked away. Sebastian leaned against the wall beside the door and closed his eyes. Outside the window at the end of the hall, the Chicago skyline was beginning to show against the early light. By the fourth afternoon, Vincent Caldwell arrived at the 9th floor with an arrangement of white flowers and an expression carefully assembled to suggest weeks of sleepless concern. Eleanor had been moved out of the ICU. She was propped up against the pillows, still pale, still slow, but present in a way she had not been for 4 days. Vincent sat beside the bed and talked about the company. He spoke of the decisions he had made, the meetings he had chaired, the reassurances he had given the board. He spoke with a quiet authority that implied all of this had been his responsibility to bear, and that he had borne it well. Eleanor listened. She watched his hands. She watched the way his eyes moved when he spoke about the board. 12 years they had worked together. She had promoted him herself. She smiled when it was appropriate, asked a short question, and let him talk. Diana was not in the room during that visit. She was at the nursing station down the hall, working on her laptop. She had been working on her laptop since 5 in the morning, when the preliminary toxicology result had given her the first thing she could actually do. The supplement order had originated in an email sent from Eleanor's internal corporate address 4 weeks before her collapse. The email requested a change in supplier from the company Eleanor had used for 2 years to a private boutique wellness provider with no public track record. Diana had received the email, confirmed the change, and placed the order without question. She had no reason to question it. The email had looked, at a glance, exactly like Eleanor's other correspondence. The subject line, the sentence structure, the signature block, at a glance. Diana had been looking for longer than a glance now. The sending address was off by a single character, a lowercase l, where there should have been a capital I. In the sans serif font used in the corporate email client, the two were visually identical. She would not have caught it on a busy afternoon. She ran the IP trace through the company's network access log. It took her 40 minutes because she had never done it before and had to figure it out as she went. When the result came back, she sat very still for a moment. The device registered to the email's sending IP address belonged to Vincent Caldwell. Eleanor received the information calmly. She read the screen Diana placed in front of her. She did not speak for close to a minute. She looked at the number 12, somewhere in her mind. 12 years, 2 continents, 6 product launches, 100 late evenings when she had believed, genuinely believed, that the person sitting across the table from her was invested in the same outcome she was. "Get my attorney on the phone," she said. Her voice was quiet. It was not shaking. Vincent Caldwell was stopped by security in the main lobby of Mercy General 40 minutes later. He was carrying his coat over one arm, and his phone was already in his hand. When the security staff approached, he went still. He did not raise his voice. He cooperated with the professional composure of a man who had prepared for the possibility that this moment might come. Before they walked him out, he glanced back once toward the elevator bank, toward the 9th floor, as if he were taking a measurement of how far the damage had traveled. The morning of the 5th day, Eleanor was moved to a standard recovery room on the 7th floor, lower floor, quieter hall, more light. Diana brought her own coffee from outside and sat with Eleanor while the morning passed. They did not talk about Vincent. They did not talk about the board or the company or the decisions that would need to be made. They sat, and the coffee went warm, and the window showed a gray Chicago sky that was just beginning to consider clearing. Diana knocked on the door with Sebastian Cole behind her at 10:30. He was still in his maintenance uniform. He had not thought about changing. There was no reason to change. He stood in the doorway with his toolbox in one hand, the way he always stood, and he looked at the woman in the hospital bed. Eleanor looked back at him. She had not seen his face clearly before. She saw it now, the lines around the eyes that came from more than age, the stillness in the way he held himself. The name stitched on his chest. S. Cole. "I heard you were the first one to see it," she said. Sebastian stepped inside. He left the toolbox near the door. "There was a handwritten note on the whiteboard in the conference room," he said. "It had been covered up. I happened to read it." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. A person who happens to read a toxicology note on a whiteboard doesn't know what galsemium alkaloids are. Sebastian looked toward the window. He told her. He kept it brief, and he kept the emotion out of it, not because the emotion wasn't there, but because he had learned over 3 years how to set it down when he needed to function. He told her about Northwestern, about 11 years of emergency medicine, about Margaret, about the Saturday night, and the pattern he had seen, and the voice he had not used loudly enough. He told her he had signed his license over 8 months later and taken a certification course and come to work in the same building on different floors. Eleanor was quiet. She did not offer sympathy. She did not lean forward with wide eyes. She sat with what he had said the way you sit with something that weighs a specific, known amount. "You stopped practicing," she said, "because you decided you had failed." Sebastian said nothing. "You diagnosed my condition from a hallway," Eleanor said, "with no chart, no access to my file, no authority to be in that conversation at all. 5 specialists, with full access to every piece of data, could not do what you did from 40 feet away." She looked at him directly. "Failure doesn't take away what you can see. It only stops you from using it." Sebastian was quiet for a moment. Then the door moved, and Grace came in. She had been in the hall with a granola bar and pepper, waiting with the particular patience of a child who has learned to wait. She looked at Eleanor in the bed with an expression of serious appraisal, and then she walked over. "Are you better now?" she asked. "My dad fixed it." Eleanor looked at Grace. Something changed in her face. Something that had been held carefully in place since she was admitted 4 days ago, released. She laughed. It was a short, genuine sound. Surprised out of her, Sebastian crouched down behind Grace and tied her shoelace, which had come loose again. When he stood, Eleanor was watching him. She was still watching when he looked up. The look she had was not the look of a patient for the person who had helped her. It was something more considered than that. Something that took its time. 2 weeks passed. Eleanor was discharged on a Wednesday. Sebastian worked his regular shifts. The days went back to what they were. Grace's fever cleared. The stuffed bear Pepper returned to its customary position on the foot of Grace's bed. The evenings in the apartment on the north side of the city were quiet, the way they had always been: dinner, homework, the small negotiations of a household of 2. At night, Sebastian found himself reading again. Not journals. Not formally. He told himself it was nothing specific. He told himself he was just keeping his mind occupied. He was not sure he believed himself anymore. On a Monday morning, 3 weeks after Eleanor Hartwell left the hospital, Sebastian arrived at his locker in the maintenance staff room to find an envelope placed flat on top of his toolbox. It had not been there the night before. It was sealed with no external marking except his name, written in pen. Inside was a card not printed, not a corporate document. A handwritten note on plain paper and a business card for the Hartwell Biogroup Foundation. The note read, "I am rebuilding the internal medical advisory division of the foundation. I need someone who can see what other people walk past. If you want to use what you have, call me. Not because you owe me anything, because the world owes it to a great many other people who haven't had someone like you in their hallway. E.H." Sebastian read it twice, standing at his locker. He folded it once and put it in his jacket pocket. He worked his shift. He changed the air filter on the 6th floor and replaced 2 latch mechanisms on the 4th and logged a plumbing call on the 2nd floor. That evening, Grace ate her pasta at the kitchen table and watched him the way she watched him when she was thinking something through. Sebastian read the note a 3rd time after she went back to her plate. "Is that from the sick lady?" Grace asked. Sebastian looked up. "How did you know that?" Grace shrugged. "I didn't. But you've read it 3 times and you keep your face the same. And that's what you do when something is important." Sebastian set the note on the table. Grace chewed thoughtfully. "You should call her," she said. "You haven't even read it." "Pepper says you should call her," Grace said, with the decisive finality of someone who considers the matter settled. Sebastian looked at the card, then at Grace, then out the kitchen window, where the city sat against the dark in its familiar geometry. He had stood still for 3 years. He had told himself it was caution. He had told himself it was wisdom, but wisdom and paralysis can look alike from the inside. And it had taken a 9-story building, a 300-page file, and a note on a whiteboard to show him the difference. He stood up from the table. He took the business card to the kitchen counter. He dialed. It rang twice. Eleanor picked up on the 2nd ring. Her voice was different from the voice of the woman in the hospital bed. Not softer, not warmer. Exactly. Just real. Present. The voice of someone who answered her own phone. "I've been wondering which day you'd call," she said. Sebastian leaned against the counter. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Grace arranging Pepper carefully in the seat of the empty chair across from her, as though the bear needed a place at the table. "Today," Sebastian said, something in his chest loosened. Something he had been holding closed since a Saturday night 3 years ago, quietly, carefully, with both hands finally, for the first time, let go.